I'm recording a demo that was previously done at Google I/O 2016, but due to some technical problems, we didn't capture the footage, so I'm doing it again for you now. So we are going to be combining a number of the tools that we talked about in the first part of the talk: the Angular CLI, Angular Material, Angular Universal, the mobile toolkit, and more. So I've recently created an empty starter repo with the Angular CLI. Since I have the Angular CLI globally installed, I can just run ng-new, the project name, and then --mobile to include the mobile toolkit. What this does is it adds a bunch of files and folders that you'll need for any Angular project, such as the main app component here, puppyloveio.component.ts, the index.html with all of your script tags, the main.ts to bootstrap your app component, and also it sets up all of the build rules for you. So it'll build your TypeScript into JavaScript, it'll set up your System.js module loader, so basically you can serve right out of the box, which is incredibly useful for developer productivity. And since we use the mobile flag, it will add a bunch of helpers for us to create progressive web apps, such as all of these default icons here for the home screen, app shell helpers, and some service worker helpers as well. I've also npm installed some of the tools that we're going to be using, such as the Angular Material components, Firebase, and Angular Fire 2. And I've set up the config in the vendor bundle and the System.js config, but you can find that in the GitHub repo later if you want to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and serve right now. So ng serve. And we're showing this on mobile on the iOS simulator, but of course this works on desktop as well. So you can see the skeleton app already running. So we're going to build this app in 3 parts. We're going to start with the application shell, which is essentially just the application layout or scaffold that will render immediately. Then we're going to move on to the dynamic content, such as the puppy profiles. And then at the end, we'll hook it up to that Firebase real-time database. So our application shell is going to be a pretty iconic application shell. It's going to have 3 parts. It'll have the toolbar at the top with the title, Puppy Love, a hamburger menu icon on the left that will open up a side nav menu. To do this, we're going to use Angular Material components. So here in our root component, we're going to import all of those Angular Material components all at once here. We're also going to add them all to our directives array at once, and any providers that we're going to use. So we have the perfect Angular Material component for the toolbar. It's called MD toolbar. And you just wrap your title in that. And we can set the color to primary here, which is the primary color of our theme. And since we didn't set one, it's just the default material theme. So you can see we have this lovely toolbar here. Next, we're going to add the hamburger icon. Since we want this to be a static thing that renders right away, we don't want it to go over a network request. So we're just going to use an inline SVG, which I have in a snippet here. And then we're going to wrap this in a button tag for accessibility, since this is going to open the side nav. And we're also going to add this MD icon button attribute so that it doesn't have any of the default button styles that might make the icon look a little funny. Okay, so here we have our icon. Next, let's add the side nav menu. So since we're creating a side nav layout, you might imagine that we have an MD side nav layout component here. We can wrap everything in, and we want it to be full screen. And while we're in here, we're also going to add some inline styles to give a background to that side nav layout. So it's going to have a background that is RGBA of 8%. And then for the side nav menu, we can use something called MD side nav. And if you tag it with a local template variable, like side nav, it'll give us access to its API. So when you click this icon, you can just call sidenav.open. So if we go over and we refresh this, you can see we have the side nav. It's pretty skinny right now because we don't actually have any content in it, but this is our application shell. So you'll notice if we refresh this, if we continue to refresh this, you'll never see this application shell blink, and that's because it's re-rendering so quickly. How do we accomplish this? So if you look at our file structure here, we have our main.ts file that you're used to, where we're bootstrapping our app normally. But we also have this main appshell.ts file. And what this does is it passes our app component into Angular Universal. And Angular Universal will pre-render our app component into a static HTML page that inlines all the styles in the HTML. And you can actually see this. If you look at the dist folder, we have the generated index.html right here. You can see all these inline styles that are pasted right in here, and also the HTML that we've written here at the bottom, which is pretty cool. Then after the first render, we'll use a service worker to fetch things from the cache instead of getting them over the network, which is very fast, but it's not turned on in development mode for reasons that you might imagine. Okay, so we have our application shell. Let's focus on actually adding some content. So we have this empty side nav. Let's put a list of navigation links in here. So if we want to do that, let's go back to our app component. We can use something called MD nav list. And empty nav list allows you to create a list of anchors. So we're going to have one for each view. And then each list item is going to have 2 lines. So it's have one line with the view's name and one line with the view's description. Then we're also going to have an icon for each of these. And we can use something called MD icon, which is a really easy way to add material design icons. So if you have the material design font loaded, you can just load the icon by ligature. So if you write something like menu, it'll just turn into the menu icon, which is pretty cool. Here it's actually going to be view.icon though. So let's go ahead and add our views object in here, or array. And it's going to have 2 links, the My Account link and the Potential Dates link. But before we look at this, I want to point out that we need to add shell no render here. And this is a directive that comes with the app shell plugin. So we get 2 directives, shell render and shell no render. Shell render ensures that whatever tag you put it on is only part of the pre-render and not part of the real app. And that's really great for something like a progress bar that you only want to show during the pre-render phase. Shell no render is the opposite. It will not be added to the pre-render pipeline, but it will be part of the real dynamic app. So in this case, for the nav list, since we have these routes, we don't want people to click on them before they're ready, so we're going to shell no render them. Okay, so if we refresh this, you can see that we have this lovely list here on the side, which is pretty cool, but we still have this big empty space here in the middle. So how do we load things inside this existing application shell? Well, we can use the router to do that. So the router gives us this directive called router outlet. And what it is, it's basically a hole that we can load route templates inside. And again, we're going to put shell no render on this because everything that's going in here is not part of the application shell. So what's going to go in here? Well, we're going to have our dog profiles in here, right? So we need to generate a component for this and also a route so we can load the route inside. So we can do that with the CLI. You can just run ng generate route and then the name of our route. And what this does is it creates a number of files for that component and also creates a route config for us. So if we go in here, we can see that we have this route config here on the bottom. We're actually going to tweak it a little bit because we want this to be our default route. And then if we go to our system config, we can add the route that we just added. So app/dogs. Then if we reload this page here, you'll see that you have the boilerplate dogs works, and that lets us know that the dog component is loading inside this app shell. Okay, so let's check out that dogs folder in here. So if we open up dogs.component.ts, we have our component boilerplate here. We're going to use a number of new material components for this, so we're going to go ahead and add all our imports at once again. And then we're also going to add any directives that we're going to use and any providers that we're going to use. So in our dogs, the HTML, let's go ahead and start adding some dog profiles. So each dog profile is going to be a card. And each card is going to have the dog's name, and for its card content, it's going to have the dog's tagline. We're also going to make this a secondary class so it looks a little nicer. Then it's also going to have an image tag with the image of the dog. So it's an alt text here, and the source is going to be the dog's image from the Material Design website. Okay, so let's add this dogs array. So eventually we're going to load this from the database, but for this first iteration, we're just going to have this array that we're just going to paste in here. And then in our CSS, dogs.css, we need to do 2 things. So first, we need to add that secondary class that I talked about. So let's make this gray. And then for our MD card component, we need to add a margin. And the reason we need to do this is because none of our Angular material components actually have a margin included, much like native elements, just because we don't know where you're going to put them, and it's really up to the user to decide what the right margin is for their application. So if we look over at our app, we have these beautiful cards. We have Angular team dogs here. The last thing we're going to do for this first part of the app is add some action buttons. So if your dog sees another dog that he or she likes, they can do something about it. So let's go back to our docs.html page, and we can add some MD card actions here. And we're going to have 2 actions. We're going to have one if you want to sniff a potential partner, and one if you want to woof a potential partner. So if you reload this here, we've got these lovely action buttons here. Okay, so we have this app that seems pretty cool. We have our cards, we have our list here on the side, but we're actually loading these dogs from our class, which isn't very cool. It'd be much cooler if we could load them from our database. So let's go ahead and put in that Firebase integration. So since we've already npm installed Firebase and Angular Fire 2 and set it up in our config, in our main.ts file, we can go ahead and import our providers right away. So we're going to need the Firebase providers and also this default Firebase function. So let's go ahead and add them right here. And this default Firebase function is going to tell the Firebase integration where to look for your database queries. And I've already set up a database here at populovio.firebase.io.com, so it knows to look there. So in our dogs component, we can import Angular Fire, which is essentially the helper that we're going to need here, and also the Firebase list observable, which is the type that we're going to get back from the database. And then we can now replace this really long, ugly dogs object. So let's go ahead and delete this. And this is now going to be a Firebase list observable type. And if we inject Angular Fire here, we can set this .dogs to af.database.list @/dogs. And what this does is it sets this .dogs to the Angular Fire's database list function that will look at the RESTful endpoint dogs. So we need to do one more thing, and that's to add the async pipe here. And you have to remember that originally we had an array, and that means that all the values are available immediately, but now we're using an observable, which means the values become available over time. So we need to make sure that ng4 knows that this is asynchronous. So if we look back, we can see that now we have our dogs again, but they're a different list of dogs because they're coming from our database, which is pretty cool. So the last thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add a form to add new dogs to this database. So we can do that again with an MD card. So we can add an MD card title here. Oops. It's just going to say create a profile. We'll have MD card content. That's essentially just going to be our form. Fill in a second. And then our card actions are just going to be a post button. And the color is going to be accent to change things up. So let's see what that looks like. So we load this here. We have this lovely form. Let's add some inputs in here. We have a material component called MD input that can animate our placeholders in a really nice way. So we're going to use that. So we'll add one for name. We'll add another one for the tagline here. And then we'll add a third for the image URL. And once again, for this, we're going to need to add some CSS. So we're just going to make this full width so that it looks right in this context. Okay, so let's allow this to refresh. So now we have this wonderful form with these animating placeholders, but it's not actually connected to anything. So let's connect it up. So in our dogs class, we can create a function called postDog that takes a value of a dog. And the beauty of the Angular Fire integration is we can just run this.dogs.push and then the value, and it will instantly be pushed to the database. It's really cool. So now we just need to let, or actually pass that form value into the function. So we can do this in our HTML. We can create a local template variable that's equal to the form instance. And then when we click this post button, we can just call postDog with f.value. That's it. So if we refresh this here, let's add a new dog here. Let's re-add Porter. We can say, I am a dog, everyone. And then I have this over here, so I don't have to memorize it. So I'm just going to paste it in. This is just going to be porter.png. So if I hit post and I scroll down, you'll see I have a new dog here at the bottom, Porter, which is pretty cool. So this is our app, which is awesome, but I want to show you a few more things. One thing is that you can actually add this to the home screen immediately. You'll notice we didn't actually do any setup for this. This comes right out of the mobile toolkit. It sets this up for you. So if you hit add, you can see we have this lovely app icon here, and if you click on it, it'll open into a native looking app experience. So we have everything that we had before, except it looks like a native app, which is pretty cool. Okay, so that's it for the demo. So if you want to learn more about Angular 2 or any of the things that we've showed today, we have a wonderful doc site at angular.io. We also had an NG conference a few weeks ago, so if you want to learn more about this, I highly recommend watching those videos.